Right. Welcome everyone to the 2017 application kickoff. Exciting times. Let me just see if this is working. It'll be more exciting times if it's working. There we go. Yay. All right. So just a quick start for you guys. I know this is a big process, and so we just want to let you know we're here for you. We're going to walk through the entire process. So right now you may not be sure of everything that you'll have to do for the next year and a half, 2 years that it takes, but you can see our wonderful students here. These folks are mostly folks who started in medical school this past year in August, and they were in your seats just 2 years ago. So you can tell that although the process is long and not without some difficulty and some amount of stress involved, it's certainly possible to get to your goal. What you really want to make sure to do is to break things down and to really make sure that you're making yourself the best candidate possible. So being really deliberate about your application process, taking things and breaking it up into small steps and making sure that you're thinking about each small step along the way, not bunching up all of the stressful things together, so you're sort of spreading it out. And then you're really taking the time to think about how you're going to be the best applicant, and then also making sure to communicate to other people who are going to be really important to your success about how you're the best applicant. So the people that you have to communicate that to are obviously the pre-health program for your letters, your other letter writers, so the people who you're going to ask for individual letters, and then also obviously the admissions committees, because you've spent a lot of time putting together a really good application, and you want to make sure that the schools that you're applying to know all the wonderful things that you've done. So our process, starting from today and then through the application cycle, is designed to help you to put together the best application possible. So our agenda for today, first we're going to talk about choosing the best year to apply, using admissions data for self-assessment, understanding the letter types and requirements, knowing that early application is key to success, and not just early application, but early everything, and understanding and using the pre-health advising program resources. So a lot of you will have already seen this pie chart, and a lot of you actually may have already graduated. This is data from MD students who applied for 2015 admission into MD programs. This data is very similar for dental, veterinary, DO, podiatry, optometry programs. We don't have a large enough pool of students to really get meaningful statistics on the other pools of applicants, but you can see of students who applied for 2015 admissions, only 30% of our applicants went directly, applied to go directly. 70% are taking one or more gap years. And it's really important to know the average age starting MD programs is now around 24, 25. The DO programs publish data on how old their students are, and this year they had somebody who was 64 starting in a DO program. Now, I don't necessarily advocate taking 40 gap years, but it's really, when you apply, is really should be based on when you're most ready, not some time frame or what people used to do 20 years ago. This is a real change. So if you have family members who are physicians, it's a real change from when they applied, or it may be a real change. So in order to decide when you want to apply, what you really want to do is make a data-based decision. So you want to do a self-assessment that enables you to make a decision that's really data-based. You're not making a decision just based on emotions, although there is obviously going to be an emotional component to it. But you really want to look at the data. Who's successful in getting in? What experiences do they have? What GPA do they have? And in fact, in part, we require you to turn in a self-assessment in order to qualify for a committee letter. So with the new medical applicant portfolio program, which you can access by your MyNEU account, on the home page, the profile page, you'll find a link to the self-assessment. Right now on that page, it says you need a password. You don't need a password to access it. You can just access the self-assessment right from the home page. And you'll download a copy of that. So it's in Google Documents. There's one that's MD and DO. There's one that's dental. There's one that is veterinary, one for optometry, and one for podiatry. So you'll download that self-assessment, save it to your hard drive, and then you're going to fill that information in, number one, so that you can do a complete readiness analysis and think about, okay, do I have and have I done everything that I feel that I need to do to be a good applicant for medical or dental or whatever veterinary programs that I'm applying to? Do I have the grades, the entrance exam scores, and the experiences that I feel that I need? Now, once you've done that, it's required that you submit that to us by January 31st, along with your applicant agreement, which you'll also access from the MAP profile. It's also a document that you'll download from Google Documents. The use of the self-assessment doesn't just stop once you filled it out and uploaded it. You're going to use that when you put together your application. You're also going to use that when you're preparing for your interviews. So we've asked questions on there that are questions that you may get in an interview. So interviewers are going to want to know, what kind of research have you done? They're not just going to want to know, what did you do? Like, oh, I did Western blots. They're going to want to know, what was the hypothesis that you were testing? Why is this research being done? What are future potential uses of the research that's being done? So why are they engaging in this research? So you really want to be thinking about the big picture of research. You know, when you're in clinical experiences, obviously you're not doctors yet. You don't have the level of skill that a doctor has. So you're not doing work at the level of a physician, but they want to know, what are you learning from what you are doing? What are you learning from interacting with patients? What are you learning from interacting with physicians? What are you gaining from the clinical? They don't just want you to show up and go through the motions. Bringing somebody a warm blanket is great, but what are you really gaining from being in that environment, in that setting? So you really want to be reflecting on, what did I learn from those experiences? And by doing that, that's going to give you a much richer application, and it's going to make you much more articulate in your interviews. And finally, I just want to add that Dr. Begley and I, when we put together our committee letters, so when we write our committee letters, we're going to do a committee letter interview with you. And the information that we learned from you in those committee letter interviews, we're going to use when we write your letter. But we're also going to look at the self-assessment that you do, all of the information that you put in MAP, and we're going to look at your application. So we actually write the letters after you submit your application. The letters are part of the secondary application. So you'll send us a copy of your application, and then we put you in the queue to write your letter. We get the letters out pretty fast. So we're looking at all of those different things. The better job you do in your self-assessment, the more we know about you and the better letter that we're able to write. So as Dr. Begley says, we don't write fiction, we write biography. So if you tell us about yourself, then we have more to write about, and we're able to write a better letter for you. So people are always asking, how do I get a really good letter? Well, this is how. You spend some time on it, you really do some good self-reflection. So data from admissions deans in 2008, a survey was sent to all of the MD admissions deans, and a very large percentage of them replied, and they were asked about what they looked at from applicants at two different points in the admission cycle. So, what do they look at when they're inviting people for interviews? And then, once the applicant has been invited for an interview, what things are they looking at when they make their acceptances? So, a school like Boston University, for example, which is a wonderful program and does accept Northeastern students, certainly, they have like 200 seats and I don't know, 15,000 applicants, right? They have far more qualified applicants than they can possibly accept. So they're narrowing down their applicants at two separate times. First, they're deciding who do we invite to interview? The people that they invite to interview, they're thinking these people can be successful in our program. These are applicants who could be really successful at our medical school. From those people, they're trying to figure out who would be the perfect BU medical student. So, who has the characteristics that match with our mission? So, in order to decide who they're going to invite for an interview, they want to make sure that you would be successful in medical school. So, they're looking for GPA, they're looking at entrance exam scores. Those are the first things that they're looking at to ensure that academically you have the metrics that demonstrate you have the ability to be successful in medical school. They really want to know that you can handle the really rigorous curriculum that is the medical school curriculum. Now, they're also going to look at some other things as well, letters, your clinical experience, the personal statement, because they also do want to get to know you because they can't invite everybody who looks like they would be successful for an interview. So your first goal there is to get that interview. Once you get the interview, how you do on the interview, if you seem like a good fit with the school, um, those things become much more important. And the GPA, the metrics fall down a little bit in the qualifications. So they're looking at all of those other pieces of you. Now, this data was from 2008, so you don't see research on here. Research has really been rising in importance to medical schools since this survey was done. So, just because it's not listed here, it's definitely something that is important to the schools. It's becoming more and more important. So, all that time that you spent on research, that's definitely going to be really important in their decision. But I just want to point out that there are sort of two different stages. For some schools, there's actually a third stage because they only send secondary applications to some of the applicants. Northeastern students tend to do a lot better on the interviews proportionate to other students because you've had so many more interview experiences. So you've all those co-op interviews that you've had are really going to help you out at this point, at this stage in the game. So that's something that's really nice. Another resource that we have that looks at what are medical schools looking for. A recent report from AAMC interviewed a number of different admissions deans. And now this is just the beginning of the report. When I will send you a copy of these slideshows, and this has a link in it to the full version from Aspiring Docs, and you can read the full report on what schools are talking about and what they're looking for, but you can see some of the things that they're looking for. They're looking for challenging coursework, personal attributes needed to work with people. So that's one of the reasons that the interviews are so important. They really want to know that you can work with people. That's why all of the medical schools require an in-person interview. And that's why letters are so important because, sometimes people can be good for one day, but they're not so great over a period of time. So they're looking at those interpersonal skills. Can this person work with humans, basically? They're looking at motivation. Why are you interested in being a physician? And this is something which comes into play with a personal statement. That's your opportunity to speak directly to the medical school admissions committee. So you really want to take the time to put together a good personal statement that helps them get to know who you are and why you're interested in being a physician or a dentist. And then they want to know about judgment, compassion, selflessness. So just a wide variety of things that they're looking for beyond the academic. Every year there are students who have, 4.0 and MCAT or DAT scores that are in the top, 1% who do not get accepted. And it's because they don't demonstrate evidence of these other skills, because medicine is a field that involves working with people. So you definitely also need to be demonstrating in your application these details. And again, some of our upcoming meetings, we're going to work on how do you show in your application that you have these skills? Because again, Northeastern students tend to really shine in the experiences, the initiative, motivation, compassion. And what you want to do as sort of your last task with that is make sure that what you've done is reflected and clearly explained to the admissions committees. So, letter types and requirements. One of the reasons that you do work with a pre-health advising program is that we do write committee letters. Committee letters are preferred by admissions committees for undergrads and recent alumni, except for folks applying for veterinary and optometry programs. For folks who may be applying for those programs, you may want to set up an appointment to meet with me. Most of those schools don't require a committee letter. Some of them like what's called an advisor letter, and Dr. Begley and I could talk to you about if you want to get an advisor letter. For the other programs, though, they may ask, why don't you have a committee letter if you don't have one? So it's really actually not that hard to get a committee letter from the pre-health advising program. It requires meeting all the deadlines and requirements on the application agreement, which you'll find either on the website or through the medical applicant portfolio, and I will also tell you about in a second. If you miss a deadline, we do still do what's called a letter packet, and a letter packet is a composite letter. It just doesn't have a letter written by the pre-health program. It may need to be explained to the admissions committee, so they may ask you why you don't have a committee letter. And in fact, some of the admissions committees email me or call me and ask me why a student doesn't have a committee letter. It requires meeting all the deadlines or all the requirements for a committee letter. So it's basically an option for somebody who has missed a deadline. And then for alumni who have graduated 3 years or more ago, you don't necessarily need a committee letter. You may decide that our requirements for a committee letter, which I will talk about further on the next slide, are not actually the best portfolio of letters for you. They don't any longer represent who you are because you have enough work experience that your work experience may in some ways be more significant than your class experience. So you may decide, yes, I want some faculty letters, but I would rather structure my portfolio of letters slightly differently. So more, people who have graduated 3 or more years ago may decide that you are going to apply without a committee letter. That's fine. We're still happy to work with people if you're not getting a committee letter. Please do note, though, if you request letters through the pre-health program and don't have the full letters, we don't send incomplete sets of letters. So if you're just having individual letters sent, you're going to have your letter writers upload those directly to the application. And we'll talk about that again in a second. So what does a committee letter require? Hopefully all you guys are aware of this by now, but we'll go over it again. So the requirements of letters for committee letters, we require 3 faculty letters, 2 of which need to be BCMP, biology, chemistry, math, and physics. 1 can be from any subject, so it can be a science letter. A lot of students decide that they want to highlight a different side of themselves, and so they'll choose another area, another field, a writing professor, if they did a dialogue, maybe a professor they went on a dialogue with, or just any other sort of professor who they had a really good relationship. We require a letter from a clinician in the specific field to which you're applying. So if you're applying to MD programs, we require a letter from an MD. If you're applying to a DO program, we require a letter from a DO. If you're applying to dental programs, we require a letter from a dentist, so on. If you're applying to MD and DO programs, which you are allowed to do, we require a letter from an MD for the MD programs and for a DO from a DO for the DO programs. This must reflect patient care experience in the U.S. within the last 18 months, and it can't be written by a relative. We strongly recommend against something written by a close family friend or your own doctor because they have a tendency to come off as a little too subjective, as opposed to the really objective letters that you get from people who only know you in the clinical setting. Shadowing letters count as those clinical letters. There's no specific number of hours for MD programs that you need to do. Some of the DO or dental programs do on their websites list a number of shadow hours that they want, and actually the dental programs want to know typically how many hours you've spent shadowing, and veterinary programs also typically want to know how many hours you've spent in the clinical setting. And then we allow up to 2 additional letters. So a research letter, a clinical letter, community service, co-op. So if you did a co-op where, maybe you shadowed a physician, but your immediate supervisor was a registered nurse, you can get a letter from the MD as your regular clinical letter, your required clinical letter, and then the nurse who was your supervisor is one of your additional letters. It's not required that you have those 2 extra letters. A lot of people do have them. And as I said, if you don't have the 4 required letters, the 3 faculty and the clinical, we won't send out those committee letters. And then you can see all the deadlines listed below. January 31st, you need to submit the self-assessment and applicant agreement up to MAP, and that's completed, not just an empty one for the self-assessment. Complete all the sections. The required letters are due on March 15th, so the 3 faculty and the 1 clinical. I really strongly recommend getting all of your letters done by then because the letter process is rather stressful and you'll just be much happier to have it all done. The one exception to that is if you're on co-op in the spring and you, maybe want to get a letter from your co-op supervisor, but March 15th is too early to ask for that letter, or to get it by March 15th is too early. You can get that letter in later, but please get it in before you submit your application. April 15th, you need to have your entire medical applicant portfolio filled out and request a committee letter interview. That's the last day to do it. You can request your committee letter interview before then, and we do recommend it. March 15th, things have, like, the March 15th, people start asking for a lot of committee letter interviews, so things start filling up on our schedules. I have a question here. Let me just read this. Is it possible to have more than the suggested amount of letters submitted to the MAP account and then choose which ones you send? That's a really good question. The answer is no, it is not. You're only allowed to have 6 letters maximum. The only exception to that is if you're applying MD and DO, you can have 7 letters. You can have an MD letter that's sent to MD programs and a DO letter that's sent to DO programs. It does take letter writers a lot of time to put together a good letter, and they're happy to do it to support your future career, but it's not very considerate to them to ask them to write a letter that you're not going to use. So we only allow letters that are going to be used to be submitted to us. And the expectation is that if a letter is submitted to us, it's going to be a letter that you're going to use. Okay. So back to the deadlines. April 15th is the last day to request a committee letter interview. May 15th is the last day to have a committee letter interview. As I said, it's the last day. This is one area where it's a really good idea to be early. Our schedules do fill up, so the first people who do their interviews wind up doing, we'll have one interview in that day. By the middle of May, we're doing 3 or 4 interviews in a day. How are you going to stand out better if you're the one person that we talk to in a day or if you're one of 4 people that we talk to in a day? It's better to be earlier just because you have a better opportunity to make an impression on us, which then leads us to write you a better committee letter just because we know more about you. May 15th is the last day to have your committee letter interview, and July 31st is the last day to submit your application. So you have to submit the application, and then you'll download a copy of it and upload that into your MAP account. As I mentioned, we don't actually write your committee letters until after you've submitted your application because some people decide, oh, I'm actually not going to apply this year. So we want to spend time on the people who are actually applying, and we want to spend time on you in the year that you're applying. We don't want to be rewriting a letter for you. Now, obviously, we recommend that you apply January 2nd, whenever the first day that the application opens up. We do not recommend waiting until July 31st to apply. Letter packets, you have to have the exact same letters as for a committee letter. If the 4 required letters are not received, we don't send a letter packet. If you aren't going to be able to get the 4 letters, please don't send requests through MAP. Instead, you'll request the separate letters through the application service. So you'll just write the individual letters on your application, and your evaluators will upload them directly. And if you get a letter packet, you do need to send us a copy of your application. So you will upload that into your MAP portfolio. You can also choose to have your letters sent directly to the schools or via the common application. For most of the programs that you'll be applying to, MD, GO, and dental schools, you would submit the letters through the common application. As I said, this is mostly a choice that's made by folks who graduated 3 or more years ago, because they feel like, I don't think 3 faculty letters is really going to be the best portfolio for me. I've been out of school for more than 3 years. I'd like to have 2 faculty letters and 4 work letters, for example. So it just may not be the best mix of letters. You do, if you are submitting individual letters, want to review your top choice schools and make sure of what their individual letter requirements are. Some schools are really strict about it, and others are a little bit more flexible. If a school requires 2 science letters, you obviously want to have 2 science letters, even if you are applying directly. And again, we're still happy to talk to you and give you advice, even if you are applying through the schools. Hopefully you guys have all seen my beautiful diagram with application timing. June is really the best time to apply to medical programs, dental programs. July is also okay, but June is really overwhelmingly the best time to apply. So, if you're putting together your materials and you're like, I'm just not going to be able to get it in until August or September, you're really better off planning to defer for a year, work, get more experience, and then apply. Here's a list of our resources. So as you guys know, you can set up an appointment with me via your MyNEU at any point. We're going to have some group advising sessions, and I'll talk about that in a couple slides. We do have a full series of workshops, so we have 7 more sessions. And again, there'll be an on-ground one on Monday evening. There's the online one Wednesday at noon, and then the recording that you can watch. Any of the sessions is fine to do. We do take attendance, but we're not saying, oh, she didn't come. We'll assume that if you didn't come, that you will watch the recording. We are happy to give you feedback on your personal statement, and we do have a personal statement workshop coming up in November, so we want to get you started thinking about your personal statement and writing a personal statement sooner rather than later. It does take a while to put together a good personal statement. You have to start thinking about it and kind of let it simmer in your mind. You don't want to just be putting together a personal statement in a month. That's not the best way to do it. And then application strategy, so planning and interview preparation. And then finally, we do have some Northeastern alumni who are matriculated at medical schools who are happy to talk to students when they have interviews set up to help you know about the individual schools. So this is the schedule for our workshops, basically every other week during the fall semester. So our next session will be on the timeline. And in the timeline workshop, we're going to talk about number 1, everything that you need to know. Again, I'm going to go over the requirements for a committee letter because you can never hear that too much. In addition to that, though, I'm going to talk about all of the things that you should be thinking about over the next 2 years. So just so you can kind of start planning mentally. When is it going to be busy? When do I need to have some time set aside? When should I have my proofreaders, poised and ready? When will I need some money? Because unfortunately, this process is not cheap. And then thinking about, for folks who are applying to MD and DO programs, thinking about the MCAT. We'll start personal statements in November. January, we'll talk about letters of evaluation. So January is a fine time to ask for letters of evaluation. If you are on co-op in the spring semester, you may want to just approach people, the faculty, before you leave if you're not going to be in the Boston area. And then we have a panel of accepted students, so students who are applying currently. There will be a lot of people who have acceptances by March, so they'll come in and you can ask them questions about what they felt helped them. That one is only on ground because, it's a panel of students. In May, we're going to have what we call application review. So once the applications become available, we'll just talk about filling out the applications, things you need to think about, and what you should be writing on there. And then in August, we do an interview workshop. And then the small group meetings, we call them the foundation meetings, and I'll have a sign up for those. They'll be in November. And basically, we'll start talking a little bit about how do you choose the schools that you're applying to. I know that people are going to be thinking about geography. They're going to be thinking about, okay, where is my GPA? Where is my entrance exam score? If you have one, you may not. But you also want to be thinking about other things when you're considering schools because students have the most success at getting into schools when they match who they are with the mission of the program. And then just general information, answering questions, kind of learning from your peers. So I'll have a sign up for that on your MyNEU, and I'll send an email about that. So finally, questions, and you can type any questions that you might have in the chat session, and I will answer those for everyone. If you have a question, probably other people are wondering about it as well. So anybody wants to type in a question, I will be happy to answer. Anyone? Um, Okay, well, I'm going to stop the recording here. So thank you everyone for coming and for listening. And again, definitely do feel free to set up an individual appointment if you have questions about your application or about requirements or anything with the committee letters. Do feel free to set up a time to meet with me. And thanks everybody for coming. If you have a question, I will be here.